Okay, so now we're going to do number 7. And this one's a little bit trickier because you have to understand some different terminology. And one is what we call, let me get a different color here, what we call working interest. If someone has a working interest, that means that they have not leased their property or they have taken a lease from someone. So the oil and gas companies all have working interest. And if someone decides not to lease their interest, that person will also have a working interest. The, one way to think about it is working interest are the people that are going to pay the bills. So if you are a royalty owner, by means of either a non-participating royalty interest owner or by means of a lease, you do not have to pay any bills. That's one of the advantages of leasing over becoming a working interest owner. So when we talk about working interest owners, we're either talking about oil and gas companies or we're talking about anyone that has not leased. So that is what working interests are. One person told me a good way to think about this, if you're familiar with this term, is the working interest is the JIB deck, the joint interest billing deck, and the net revenue interest is the division order pay sheet. The net revenue interest says what profits everybody's going to get. So what is the revenue that everybody's going to get? So working interest, who's responsible for making payments? Revenue interest, what is each person's profit going to be according to that division order pay sheet? Okay, so now let's look at the scenario itself, now that we have those two terms pretty clear in our minds. All right, so number 7 reads, A owns 100% of the minerals under Section 6. So A owns 100% of the minerals. And then it gives us 3 separate transactions that occurred, three separate things that happened on 3 separate dates. First of all, A grants to B a 1/8 interest in the oil and gas produced and saved. So right away we know that this is a royalty interest. Okay? And that happens on January 2nd, 1960. A grants to B a 1/8 interest in the oil and gas produced and saved. So here we know B is going to have at least a 1, oh, he wouldn't, let me see. Let's say as a revenue that B is going to have at least a 1/8 mineral interest. I'm sorry, royalty interest. 1/8 royalty interest. And we'll just go ahead and fill that in right there. And then what happens next is that on February 9th, it says A leases to an oil company, retaining a 3/16 royalty using a standard form AAPL lease. So now A has leased to an oil company. And once you lease, you know you don't have any working interest rights. You give all your working interest rights to the oil and gas company. So now we know that once she's leased, her working interest is going to be 0. So I'm going to fill hers out as 0 working interest because she's leased her interest. Then on July 10th, A then grants to C a 1/8 interest in oil and gas in, on, and under Section 6, subject to existing leases and other conveyances. So here we know that this is a mineral interest. And so A is granting to C a mineral interest of at least 1/8. Okay. Then all instruments were properly recorded on the day they were granted in the proper repository. So let's look first at A, which we talk about working interest owners. This is really easy because we know A has leased her property, therefore she has no working interest. She's given 100% of her working interest to the oil and gas company. B only had a royalty interest, so he's a non-participating royalty interest owner. So he would have 0 working interest. And then C, because he has no right, remember, to grant an oil and gas lease, he does not have the executory rights. So he's going to be 0. And then C, A then grants to C a 1/8 interest in oil and gas in, on, and under. So C has this 1/8 mineral interest, but she hasn't leased it to anybody. But she takes subject to the existing leases. And so since A has already leased it, C will also have 0 working interest. Now, it's a little bit more complicated when we're talking about net revenue interest. So let's see how we do with this. First of all, we know that A owned 100% of the minerals, but she conveyed 1/8 of her minerals, and she kept the remaining 7/8. All right. Then we know she leased to an oil and gas company with a 3/16 royalty interest. And she also had previously conveyed this 1/8 royalty interest to B. And so now we have to subtract that 3/16. We have to subtract that 1/8 royalty interest. So her calculation would be 7/8 because she gave the other 1/8 interest here to C. So she, instead of owning 100% of the minerals now, she only owns 7/8 of the minerals. And then we're going to do 3/16 minus 1/8. And that is going to give us 3/16 minus the 1/8 is going to give her 0.05. So what we're doing here is we're subtracting 3/16 minus 1/8. And we know that to do that, we've got to get the lowest common denominator. Remember, when we're dealing with subtraction, we've got to get that lowest common denominator. So I can do this out to the side, 3/16 minus 1/8. So lowest common denominator would be 16. So 8 goes into 16 2 times. 2 times 1 is 2/16. So we're going to go 3/16 minus 2/16. And that's going to give us a 1/16. So now we're going to take this 1/16 and we're going to multiply it times 7/8. And if I divide 7 divided by 8, that's going to be a 0.875. So I'm going to say 0.875 times a 1/16, which is 1 divided by 16, equal a 0.065. And then if I calculate that out, 0.875 times 0.0625 is going to give us this 0.0546875. So that is what her net revenue interest is. This is her decimal interest that's going to appear on her division order or the company's division order pay sheet. 0.546875. Okay, that was a little bit trickier. Now B, we know, owns a 1/8 royalty interest. And so B's interest is going to be a 0.125 royalty interest. Very simple. He doesn't get any of the advantages of the leasing or anything else. Then the oil company's net revenue interest is going to be 1, their 100% interest, minus the 3/16. The oil company does not care that 1/8 went to a royalty interest went here and the mineral went here. So they're just going to do 1 minus 3/16, which is 0.1875. 1 minus 0.1875